All right, welcome guys. Today we're joined here by the Eden Prairie, Minnesota Mayor, Ron Case. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Frank and Jack.
Thank you. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. I just want to ask, what is the current state of Eden Prairie in the city of Minneapolis, and how have the protests affected your community?
So we're a second ring suburb. The entire 7-county metro area is probably 2.5 million people. So we are in the southwest corner. In the sense of the direct consequences of some of the protesting, or at least the protesting has such a negative connotation to it. So I would say the appropriate responses to what occurred with the death of and the murder of George Floyd. The first ring suburbs probably had more of an impact. We prepared in case we had any illegal activities, and I think at the time we were probably concerned also about the far-right white supremacist kind of response as well. We wanted to make sure that we were well prepared for any type of response. So we did issue curfews primarily to match the core cities and also the first ring suburbs. So the night of Friday evening and Saturday evening, we had an 8 o'clock p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew on our city, which enabled our police then to be able to deal with whatever they encountered, right? And to know that if you lived in Eden Prairie, you shouldn't be out during that time. So if somebody was, then they could deal with that. And then on Sunday evening, we went with 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. So again, we were really staying in close contact with the 7 or 8 suburban mayors around us, trying to work in tandem with them. So in terms of consequences or subsequent responses, really there's just been a tremendous outpouring of support here in Eden Prairie. People, I'd say I get about 5 emails a day of people asking not only what can we do, but we want to be part of the organized response. So say like tomorrow, there's a group of people meeting at one of our parks to, again, protest is an interesting word, but basically to be part of the positivity of this protest. So there's that kind of connection. We also did a major food drive for a couple areas, some senior residence places down in some of the areas that were burned and in Minneapolis. But otherwise, I think it's just because we are part of this suburban, larger Twin Cities community. We've grieved. I mean, it's been I hope a watershed time in American history, but I think it's definitely been meaningful and tremendously difficult, I think, for Eden Prairie people to go through this as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So 2 days ago, it was announced that all the officers involved and responsible for the death of George Floyd were prosecuted by Attorney General Keith Ellison, who is an alum of our school. And yesterday, the funeral of George Floyd was held in Minneapolis at North Central University, just 23 minutes away from Eden Prairie. Do you think America is close to a common ground when it comes to racial injustice, or do you feel we still have a long way to go? And then, if so, how long?
I'm saddened that that you're asking the question, and I'm sadder that I don't have a great answer. I don't think we're close. I think we're making progress. Even that is sad because you can tell by my gray hair that I'm older than you are. You do much, and these kinds of issues were in my childhood. I grew up outside Washington D.C. and I was in 8th grade when the riots occurred in 1968 across the nation after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. And one would think we would have come a whole lot further, in the last 50 years, and we have not. I think one of the issues with and I don't necessarily even always like to use white people and black people. I'll use it now for explanation purposes. But one of the problems I think with white people's perceptions is that many of us are very open-minded, caring. My roommate was black in college, back in the 70s. I mean, many of us are incredibly open-minded, but that leads us to maybe feel that things are better than they are because systemically, societally, we have not changed the way we need to. I mean, yes, more and more white people and black people are getting closer and becoming better friends and living in. My son just bought a house in Minneapolis, and the next door neighbor's wonderful black family. I mean, it's just that's something that, say, in the 1940s and 50s would have not been so normal, and absolutely is today. There's signs of improvement everywhere, but why do we still have such disparities between the way black people are treated by police officers and white people? Why do we still have such economic disparities? Why, why are there such disparities in college graduation rates? I mean, why is that still here? And I would say, if anything, I hate to even say silver linings, because George Floyd was a wonderful man who did not deserve to die, and his death is, if it results in good, that's good, but it's not good for George Floyd. But nonetheless, if anything good comes out of this, I do think every instance of tremendous evil like this can result in incrementally more and more people becoming outraged. And I will say, I'm 65 years old, so I will say this is the most watershed moment in my lifetime so far, where I sense that there's such anger and outrage within the white population on behalf of what black people have gone through, are going through. I'm cautiously hopeful for that, but society has a long way to go, and we have so much racism and prejudice and discrimination in other parts of the country that we don't control. Minnesota, I suppose, in some ways is it ought to be a more progressive place. I can't believe what has happened in Minneapolis. It's not a good mark on Minnesota, but we're not Mississippi, right? We're not Alabama, we're Minnesota. But nonetheless, we have problems in the South today that are going to take another generation, so sadly, to go through. But maybe we need systemic federal laws, right? More and more to protect. We have federal laws on the books today that obviously are not doing enough, right? And so if this causes just a larger mass of people to rise up and say, this has to change, this just has to change, right? And maybe you're going to ask me later on, how do we begin to go about doing that? Maybe that's your next question. That is if it is, if it's not, I'll answer on my own later. But that's the expression that you don't understand, but that's the $64,000 question, is that what's our next step? What's our immediate next step? Because we know in the big picture, systemically, things have to change.
Thank you for that answer. And that kind of goes into my next question, which is nearly 74% of the population of Eden Prairie is Caucasian, while only 7% of the population is African American. How are you, as the mayor, making sure that the Black residents of your city feel comfortable and feel safe?
Yeah. So let me step back and caveat that we're up in about we're somewhere around 25, 6, 7% diverse. And that means Asian, Indian, Somali, Hispanic, quite a large Asian, Chinese population, American Chinese population. So in terms of diversity, Eden Prairie is making great headway. wasn't too long ago. You can go back into the early 90s, and we were probably 90-something% white. I believe the kindergarten class of this year was 53% or something diverse. So that's the good news. What the George Floyd murder has catalyzed in so many Americans, I think, is that a lot of groups experience discrimination and bigotry and hatred and prejudice, and it's not okay. I mean, Chinese Americans with the COVID virus ridiculously connected to them, and they've experienced discrimination. Hispanic Americans with any people that want to see them through the lens of immigration, which is unfair. So many subgroups are experiencing discrimination and prejudice, but Black America has experienced way over anything that I don't mean to compare diverse groups here. Prejudice is horrible, bigotry is horrible in any of its forms. But Black America has a unique set of historical circumstances that are apparent today that we need to make a special emphasis to correct and to right. And again, it may take too many years for it to feel comfortable, but we need to, I think, directly address as society systemic prejudice and discrimination toward Black America. And there are historical reasons. 400 years, starting with the I got to do my math here. What does that make it? 200 some of slavery. It's what America has done and how we've treated Black Americans is still such an issue today that probably does bleed over into how we are so prejudiced towards others, but it's unique, I think, to Black America as well. And I think the George Floyd issue has highlighted that. And so, yes, Eden Prairie is diverse, and we're so proud of that. We need to make a specific effort to make sure that I'm not sure what you just said, I think it's 6 or 7% Black Americans in Eden Prairie, and I'm not sure if that includes our Somali Black Americans. And I know that our I don't know how you can differentiate maybe our post-slavery Black America. That group again experiences specific issues that we need to, as a society, address. So you asked how. Sorry, I'm rambling here. So how? I don't have an answer, but I'll tell you how we need to start. So we have a Human Rights and Diversity Commission that deals with issues of prejudice and discrimination, and they have a diversity fair and with in the summer, and they do special activities and give grants. I mean, it's a really great commission of people. At our June 16th council meeting coming up, I'm going to ask staff to task the HRDC basically to clear off their agenda for the rest of the year and address the question of how do we build out a plan that's actionable that will address systemic racism and systemic inequality for anyone, but especially geared toward the Black community in Eden Prairie. We're a small cog in this whole process, right? We're, like, to your point, 6 or 7% Black population, and then we're 65,000 people, out of 2.5 million, whatever, in the Twin Cities, and then of course Minnesota is only whatever 6-some million people across the whole United States. So we're small in this, but if every community across America sits down and really, I hate to use the word advantage because it sounds positive, and I don't want anything to be thought of as positive from George Floyd's death, but if something positive can take place in every community across America where we recognize this as a watershed moment in American history. We've had others, Martin Luther King Jr.'s death was a watershed moment. We didn't do enough with it, right? We've had many other watershed moments, but this is a big one. And if every community addresses this and does something, then then hopefully change begins slowly to occur, and it goes up to the legislative level and it goes up to the federal level. We need change. We need the words coming out. I'm not going to make any statement beyond what I'm going to say right now, but we need the words coming out of every national leader and every state leader and every county leader and every municipal leader that supports the idea that America has to change. This is not okay. And words are not enough. The Black community's heard words. They've heard the idea that, hey, we're going to have a conversation about this. Sadly, I think that's where it has to start, but we've got to do more than that. We have to do more than words, and we have to do more than a conversation.
Thank you for that. I agree with you. To follow up with that, have you had a conversation with any of your officers? And if so, what was that conversation about? If not, how will you make sure that this heinous act of violence doesn't happen in your city?
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely have. I mean, I've chatted with the chief of police 15 times, I guess, in the last week. Interesting. I just read in the paper this morning that from I think a Black American, that just because white America has had positive experiences with an individual police officer, which I have with many, that in and of itself should not mean that we don't need systemic change in the way police officers police, particularly in the Black community. So I absolutely, I just want to say I agree with that. And I'm not just glossing over, hey, Eden Prairie is a great place to live and we have a great police department. I think we do. I mean, I really believe, I've known the last 6 captains or the chiefs, and our culture here in our police department has been built on relationships. And little things like, and I don't think it's little, we have a new police officer has 2 days of de-escalation training. I believe, I hope I'm not saying this wrong, I believe the Minneapolis Police Department had 2 hours in their training. I asked our chief, I said, how would the George Floyd arrest, how would it have gone different, or how could it have gone different? And he said, and he's very careful. I mean, it's one thing, you have to judge and everyone I think has judged the action of these 4 police officers as completely wrong in so many ways. But police departments also need to be careful in case they end up in court or something, making a statement on one side or the other. But I just asked him, what would our officers have done different based on their training? And he said, when they arrest somebody, if that person has any medical issue whatsoever, we address that medical issue. So had George Floyd said, I can't breathe, or I'm having heart issue, or whatever, we would, because he was already incapacitated, he's like, we absolutely would have set them up, and we have oxygen right in every single one of our squad cars, and we would have addressed his medical needs. I believe that. I think there's history that we've done things like that. So would it have saved George's life? I think so, but whatever. But the culture's different here. So that being said, if we do have the Human Rights and Diversity Commission, which we will, address the issue of systemic racism and inequality, we will be looking at, how do we do at City Hall? How do we do with our 300 staff? How do we do with the fire department? How are we doing with our school district? How are we doing with the police department? Is there systemic racism that we've been blinded to? Do we need to look at that? We will be looking at that. We will, as just regular oversight of the police department and fire department and city staff, will be looking at policing policies, and we have. I mean, we receive annually a report from the chief where we ask, what kinds of training do our officers go through? What would happen? In fact, I've had conversations about how would they respond in certain instances. So I do feel like we have a handle on how our police department does things. That doesn't mean, though, that systemically, certainly across the nation, but the way that policing is generally thought of in general, that needs to be scrutinized. I did have an email today from somebody that said, you're spending 14% of your budget. I think that's correct. I'm not sure on a police department. That's too much. I mean, we should not. That's ridiculous to be spending that much money. And I'm like, well, you got to remember the majority of police calls are medicals. I mean, they're not going out arresting people; they're going out saving lives. There's a heart attack, or there's an accident on a highway, or they're all first aid trained. I mean, over half of our police calls are medically related, and we still have some drug and gang issues. We still have theft. I mean, there's things that police officers are in and of themselves based on what they do, not the bad people here. Doesn't mean that type of role doesn't attract a certain personality, and you have to make sure when you're hiring that you screen for people that aren't control freaks or aren't, trying to laud physically themselves over others. Or I read today that this officer that was charged with murder in Minneapolis, his past is with the military police. There's profiles that we need to be very careful when we hire. So yes, we'll be looking at all of that, I hope, through this Human Rights and Diversity Commission initiated process of community reflection.
Right. So alongside with all the protesting that's going on, we're still in the midst of a pandemic. So how are you making sure that your citizens stay safe despite much needed protests?
Yeah, it's been interesting, hasn't it, with COVID? So a lot of that is outside of our control and purview. It's, I heard just today that our governor has opened up restaurants now. It was just an announcement today. Restaurants had been open last week for deck dining, but now they're opening up inside dining. So things are loosening up right at this time anyway. And it doesn't mean that the virus is going away. It's not. In fact, people that have been listening clearly to medical and government elected officials, that the virus, we cannot keep anyone from getting the virus. I mean, you can work at that by staying isolated and wearing the mask and washing your hands. But the virus, we have no human immunity to it. So the goal of government all along was to control the rapid spread of it so that we didn't overwhelm our medical system, but not to keep eventually it from going to go through our people, sadly. But we're trying to keep it away from the most vulnerable, the chronically ill, people in nursing homes, people who had cancer. So we're trying to advise and help keep the virus contained in that way. But the idea that protesters might be spreading it, yes. And again, knowing that 98, whatever the stat is, 98.8% people are not being hospitalized with it, are not dying. It's in fact, there's some data out there now that the cruise ship that was down in South America, which is the first time we have a control group of 400 or so people that could be tested. They were together for, I think, nearly a month. And it turns out in that group, 81% were asymptomatic. Well, that's interesting, good and bad news, right? Bad news is that if 81% of the people out in society are asymptomatic, they're all spreading it, and we don't even know it. Good news is that 81% of the people are getting it and not really getting it, right? I mean, so we've got to learn a lot more about why this virus strikes some people so devastatingly. You hear the 30-something-year-olds that die from it. I mean, their lungs fill up, and we don't know why yet. And then why might 50, 60, 70, maybe even 80% of the people be getting it but not getting any symptoms? So all that to say that we're concerned. In Eden Prairie, we don't have a large protesting movement yet. I've been at two of the religious gatherings that were outdoors, people socially distanced, most wore masks. So we're not mandating that, but all government levels are encouraging that if you're outside and you're not socially distancing, wear a mask. That's about all we can do. Now, down in Minneapolis, they had thousands and thousands and thousands of people gathering together, and most without masks. So the fear is that many of them might get it. And at that point, again, that wasn't our attempt to keep everyone from getting it, just to keep everyone from getting it at the same time. So I think it's going to be okay that the protesting movement won't spike our hospitals beyond the ability to handle it. We'll just have to see.
Thank you for that. So, due to COVID, more than 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment. And as a result, kids are starting to miss more meals, become more depressed, and live in an environment that is unhealthy and unstable. Niche.com ranked your city as the #1 suburb in Minnesota. What advice do you have for kids that live in poverty stricken neighborhoods? And do you feel that political leaders have to be held accountable for the lack of preparation?
Whoa, loaded question there. Good
Yeah,
question.
there's a lot going on.
What were we rated #1 at? We were #1 suburb from who rated us at?
Niche.com said you were the #1
Oh,
suburb in Minnesota. So congratulations.
cool. We've won a lot of awards. I had not heard of that one. Our unemployment rate has remained pretty low relative. I mean, we do have quite a few people that obviously did lose jobs, but with all of the federal and state and local unemployment assistance, we feel that many people have weathered this pretty well, but still you just feel so badly for those that are going through such tough times now. It's from day one with this COVID virus. It's been such a difficult middle ground to walk down the middle on between. Are you working hard to save the lives of seniors and trying to protect the virus from getting to them by shutting down the economy, knowing exactly what you said, that you're also going to harm then a certain segment of the society that loses their jobs, and then their children will be impacted based on food deficiencies. So, I don't know that governors across the nation have really talked about it in that way, but you're really weighing, in a way, one group of people's needs and health against another, trying to do both, trying to protect the vulnerable and also support the ones that lose their jobs. So we have and the federal government has given us some money. We've really upped our food shelf ability to assist, and I believe I haven't heard the numbers, but I would guess they're assisting probably twice the number of people they normally do. So we're trying to support that way. The school district, I believe, every day has been delivering bag lunch meals out to, for sure, the free and reduced lunch kids that had been getting their, maybe main meal a day from school. They're now getting those lunches delivered. So we've been working that way. And our city had I think I mentioned this, yeah, I did, a massive food drive trying to help out some people down in Minneapolis. So, and then we also have a fund that our community foundation set up so that, people that did not lose jobs and people that feel fortunate have an outlet to give, to others. And I think the fund has raised $30,000, I think, probably in the last month. So we've, and as a city, we've been supportive of that type of initiative on our websites and in any social media that we could. So we've been trying to do that. So you asked, your last part of the question was, are government officials culpable? Should they be held accountable? Well, in general, yes. I mean, I think government officials, in every decision that they make, positively impact some people and negatively impact possibly others, and so they should be held accountable. The difficulty with that is that you'd never believe it right now with the stimulus package, but there, in theory, is only so much money to go around, though it seems like we had a lot more money to go around lately than what we did before. But that being said, the way that money got distributed seemingly had some winners and some losers. So yes, I mean, I would say hold government responsible. Individual government leaders often are stuck doing the very best that they can in the moment. I mean, like, governors don't they don't get to vote, they get to veto, but it's the legislature that passes things. So they're kind of stuck based on their legislatures. I'm the mayor, but I'm one of 5 votes, so I can't snap my thumb and make things happen. So elected officials are doing the best they can within the environment. I think generally, not all, within the confines of the environment that they operate. But yeah, I mean, you always hold elected officials accountable to whatever their choices are. If you don't like what they voted on, you vote them out.
Right. So, as political leader, how can you make sure you help the youth manage their stress, anxiety, and depression during these bizarre times? And maybe taking it a step further, how can you make sure schools are be held accountable for making sure kids are okay mentally?
Um, I don't know that society's done a great job at that before COVID. I mean, you look at anytime there's a mass shooting at a school, people, get really interested in were there support systems for that person. Often those people have been shown to be loners that were lost in the system. And why weren't they picked up, And so I don't know that we've ever done great with addressing and meeting the needs of kids who have some loneliness, anxiety, mental health issues. Mental health is one of those things that everyone wants to support it after the fact. I mean, after something happens, after a bad abuse case, or after somebody loses it, and starts to go shoot or something. Everybody at that point points a finger and says, we should have social workers go in there early, and we should have identified them, and we should have, had all these support structures in place. But those are often the last dollars that people try to go find when there's budgets, right? Because I don't want to say it's squishy, but it's not. It doesn't produce a tangible result. It's not like buying computers or paying for that staff person to open up a new class at the high school. I mean, those are things you can wrap your hands around. But let's hire 10 more social workers that will visit homes. How do you show the outcome results to that? You don't. I mean, the only way you kind of show it is if you don't have a bad blow up of something, but that doesn't prove. I don't know what the term is in philosophy, but the absence of something happening isn't always proof that it would have happened, and so it's really difficult. They're the last dollars often into a system, and yet we all in our hearts believe they ought to be the first dollars. We ought to have good social work coverage. And the only thing I would be hoping right now, and I think this is probably more school district related, and in our city, the school board is completely different than city council, and they control their school board totally. But I would hope maybe with so many, I'm not saying teachers are furloughed. They've been working really hard electronically and digitally from home, but with the jobs different, I would hope maybe there's staff people that could be moved over to really work with checking in with kids to make sure that they're okay, and having more and more group chats, and being able to really make sure that kids' needs are getting met, because we're more secluded and isolated right now than ever. And quite frankly, it's not just kids, right? I mean, more and more we're reading articles about adults, that are socially isolated and stuck at home, and they're not talking to anyone. They're not, talking out their anxiety and their fears. And it's one of those things that I think you're finding as you talk to me. I don't have a lot of really good answers because I have thoughts, but good answers are really hard to come by, because number one, if they're really that good and that workable, they would have been used and done already. And I just think the real life has so many obstacles. And part of it's we have so many people that have opinions. And then, of course, anything has to do with money gets prioritized in there. And then if you have multiple people weighing in on spending the money, then it's just a complicated system, very complex. But hopefully out of this does come value. Society will place value, maybe out of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement, maybe out of this whole mix of what 2020 has been, which is I think without much conversation about it, has been probably the most traumatic year of anyone's life. But maybe out of the mix of all this comes a renewed sense of looking at prioritization of spending. I guess that's my hope. I don't know. But in that mix will hopefully be funding for kids and mental health issues.
Thank you for that, Mr. Case. So that kind of leads me into my next question. We've had racial protests, we've had a pandemic, we've had people going to space, but we've never seen all these things happen in the same year. How have you, as a political leader, had to adjust to all this? And also, how has mental health been during this time? Adjustments.
Okay, I heard the first part about adjusting to everything going on, and it just broke up a little bit on it. How have I? What was the mental health piece of that?
How has your personal mental health been during this time? Adjustments.
So first place, it has been a really interesting time to be a leader, right? It just has at all levels. And I would say, not that any leader wants drama and crisis during their time, but on the other hand, the very best leaders rise during those times. I was a sixth grade teacher for 33 years, and I used to ask my students when we were doing a unit on the U.S. presidents, I'd have them just list them. Like I could ask you both right now, just right now, write down every president. Maybe you all could get them all. But anyway, sixth graders, write down every single president you remember. Well, guess who they remember? Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, some of them Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But if you look back on their list, every one of them faced crisis. I mean, everyone, and most of them were part of a war, or something. They don't mention Franklin Pierce or James Buchanan, or they don't mention those. They had mellow times for the most. By the way, Buchanan was probably horrendously should be remembered for his lack of action on slavery, but whatever. But the point is that the ones that are remembered rose to the occasion. So you look at the leaders today that I think have risen amazingly well. Andrew Cuomo from New York. I mean, maybe people don't like some of the decisions he's made, but he's been a leader. I think our governor out here, Waltz, has been fantastic. Just to be forced to be out with people doing the job of a leader. So in that way, I guess I take it as an honor and a privilege that I've had this opportunity to be a leader during this phenomenal time of crisis. And if I can have an even bigger soapbox and an even larger voice to impact positive change in people during this time, to be a healer and a comforter and a reassurer, but also a challenger and an educator. If I can have those opportunities during this time, then it's been the best opportunity that I could have ever hoped for as mayor. I don't wish that. I don't want. You always want the mellow and the stationary and the quiet. You always kind of think you want that, and you do, right? I mean, you want life to be like that. But looking back on when you're 98 years old and you're looking back on your life on what stuck out as the big stuff, it'll be the love and your family members. But in terms of professional or whatever, it'll be those times you were tested and you rose to the occasion and you succeeded. So in that sense, that's been positive. In terms of my personal mental health, I have a great family and I have really good friends that I talk to, and I have been, as mayor, I've had that outlet of being able to daily talk to staff members. We have an open meeting law in Minnesota that the majority of an elected body cannot talk about an issue together. So I can usually only call one council member and chat with that person, but I've been doing that. And then try to do different council members on different topics, but whatever. and then I have 4 grandkids, and just always keeping me grounded that they're what it's all about. And in the last 3 weeks, we've decided as a family that we would get back together again, stay as protected as we could from others, but we would begin to give hugs to our grandchildren again. So I've been grounded because of what for me really matters in life, and I'm at this stage in life that I feel tremendous sense of responsibility, but also accomplishment and satisfaction that I've been able to do the things that I've been able to do. So I think, I guess others should probably judge my mental health, but I feel pretty well grounded, pretty stable. I'm not a stable genius, but sorry, that was a little bit of a joke there, but sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just got the 5 minute warning for our time here, but I just want to ask one final question. So there's a lot of unrest in our country right now, and we see this unrest largely in part of young people who are taken to the streets. Do you think that this is necessary, and do you think there's a sign of hope for the future?
So I'm not going to quote Martin Luther King Jr. here because I won't get it right, but I'll get the idea of it. But when he talked about the rioting that he had witnessed and that he wasn't condoning it, but he was basically asking society to look behind it and say, what's it about, right? Why? I mean, don't just blow it off or just say it's radicals or, it's just those people doing something, but really, really look at, for people to go into the streets and protest, and there's something there, right? I mean, we just don't leave our homes for causes that are not near and dear to our hearts. So I would say that in general, that as I've gone through my life, there's definitely stages of life that you see things differently, but you also do things differently. And there's passion and clarity in youth. It's not always accurate. Don't misunderstand me. I mean, it's sometimes when you're 65, things look a little bit different, and there's wisdom in that. But in terms of sometimes to act on something, to plow ahead, you just want one or two options and then you choose, and then you go for it. You don't want 19 options like maybe a 65-year-old has, and then you get a committee together to, you don't have time to do that. So there's clarity and there's power and passion in youth. And I think that changes society. It just does, right? I mean, all generations have their not generations, all stages and phases of life has its advantages, and definitely you look at the Native American world culture that they so value their senior citizens and for their wisdom and their perspective. We need that. We need our matriarchs and patriarchs, and we need to pick their brains for wisdom. But we need our youth to go out into the streets peacefully and legally and make changes. And so I commend them. I'm saddened and sorry that Black young men and Black young women are looking at their country and this society and saying it's nowhere near met my needs. I can't even go out into the streets and feel safe when Jack and Frank, the differences between a police car pulling up behind you in an inner city, you two would have completely different reactions to it, and that's not okay, right? That's horrible. And I think for kids, I guess, for youth to lead that charge, it's commendable, and I think it probably has to be. It just has to come out of the youth. You probably need the senior leaders, the older people to be part of that too, because they have the connections into the political systems that will go out and pass the votes to make change. But I would encourage Black and white and brown and every other tone of skin color. I would encourage youth to stay boy, I don't know about stay in the streets. I think that's a metaphor, but to stay active in protesting, especially through this election in the fall. You know, elections are powerful and they will change things. And you know, people forget, like on a city council in Eden Prairie, there's 5 of us. It takes 3 votes to pass a law.